Hey, welcome back to Music Theory Logic. My name's Andrew, also known as D.R.U, when I'm making heavy bass music. And today is going to be a music theory breakdown where we go over one of my original releases. This track came out a little over a year ago on a label called Evoked Natives. It's called Vision of the Past. Let's go ahead into the Logic session. So, let's see. Here we are. This is the Logic session for the project file. I basically mastered it in a separate session, but I did like all of the mixing, and this has a master chain for us to hear it. I'm going to go ahead and play the song from the beginning, then we're going to talk about all the different layers, and I'm going to try to keep this somewhat concise. Here we go. Cool. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you do like the track, you'd help me out a ton by going and streaming this, put it on at work, put it in your independent movies. This is a licensable, fully ready to go track. So again, it's off the label Evoked Natives. Evoked Natives is how I met 77T. We put out the track Light After Dark. There's another music theory breakdown about that. I will link to the track below, but let's go ahead into our logic stuff so I can talk about the music theory. So if you're not familiar with music theory at all, basically music theory helps us to explain chords and scales. Most music that we enjoy or classify as music uses scales and chords of some kind. This isn't like a substitute for creativity or an ear. It's just another way of understanding the music. So here's our reference key. Shout out to my friend and student Chris. He gave me some pointers. Hopefully this is a little bit easier to see. This is the only black key. These two are the only black key. Only two black keys. We are in the key of E harmonic minor. What that means is it's basically E minor. The harmonic minor comes from the second to last note, or the seventh scale tone being raised up a half step. So E minor, and why I said one sharp in the beginning is basically that. All the white keys from E to E. So E, all the white keys between E and E except for this F sharp. So E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. So almost all the white keys except for that 1, F sharp, second scale tone. Cool. So a harmonic minor, where we get this note raised up, which would be our D sharp, basically that makes the 5 chord, the chord built on, in this case, a B, a major chord. So when this note's on a D, it's a B minor chord. When this note's on a D sharp, it's a B major chord. And harmonic minor is really common in classical music. One of my professors in school told our whole class that harmonic minor is almost more common than natural minor. So it's funny that we define natural minor as natural minor. So let's go ahead and just run through all the sections. The introduction, we're hearing a cello, damage, this vocal pad, which is also an east-west instrument, a violin, a sub, and then finally some of our drums. So let's hear that section. All right, so the main melodic riff is actually in the cello. The low end sounds like this. So that second to last, or the very last note of the phrase, is that D sharp. That's the note that tells us we're in harmonic minor as opposed to natural minor. So the notes I'm playing are the 1, 5, 3. So this is kind of like an E minor arpeggio. This is 4, 5. That's the third note in the scale. 4, 5, 4, 5. And then here we go to notes from the 5 chord. The 5 of the 5, the second in our scale, the F sharp. Down to the raised 7th scale tone, that D sharp. And then this basically repeats the whole time. So let's watch that and while it plays. Now the first other melodic thing you hear is the vocal pad. This is literally just holding the 1, which is an E. Again, that's east-west instruments. Play. We're in granular omni from the granular omni from Goliath. So east-west instruments. I did a breakout video. It's probably out by now. So check that out. I love east-west instruments for organic stuff and then like weird stuff like this. So together, it's that. Basically a choir. All right, finally we have the drums. Now this is the instrument Damage by Native Instruments, or by Heaviosity. It plays on contact by Native Instruments. I've done a breakout video on that drum thing as well. But essentially, it's one of the best cinematic drum engines I am aware of. I use it in a lot of my stuff. I feel like I really like making my music, since it's the heavy stuff, feel like really end of the world, dramatic, just crazy. I feel like it's almost like a score for a movie that hasn't happened. And I feel like that about a lot of electronic music. So let's go into sub. The sub is basically doing this descending bass line. It's going from the 1 down to the 6, down to the 5. It's on the 1. We're doing steady eighth notes. I should mention we are at, I think, 145. Is that right? 145 beats per minute. So we're doing eighth notes at that speed. That creates some extra energy. All right, moving along. Our horns are also just doing the 1 note. So like there's not a lot of crazy stuff happening. It's basically a bunch of the 1 note with these other melodies on top. So the melodies on top start to have more of a harmonic sound because of the combination of all these like 1 notes. So our violin is just playing the 5 up to the 6, the B and the C. Rhythm is like that, basically with the pickup. So the last quarter note. we'll look at damage. So essentially damage is like a really cinematic, crazy drum engine. So all of this is audio. I program it via MIDI, but in this session, it's all converted to audio. That's a really good trick for any instrument that like takes a lot of power from your computer. This is going to make it easier. So I don't even have damage open anymore. Let's go through the next section. So we get the intro for 16, then we're going into the break. It's basically a break for 4 bars, and then it's an 8-bar buildup. On the buildup, I'm using a couple drum samples. I think some of these are cymatics. One I built. That's happening with this. And that's all happening with our damage. All right, so this was a layer I was pretty stoked on. I took that same vocal pad that we saw, the choir from East West, and I bounced it in place. So this is audio. And then I'm affecting said audio. So I'm sending it through Little Altar Boy. This is a really cool Sound Toys plugin. I'm just pushing the formats down by 6. I don't know if we define formats in semitones, but by a metric of 6. Then all of that's going through a tremolo. We're doing an 8th note tremolo. That's what's making the voice sound like it's stuttering. And then finally, all of that's going into the UAD, the 1176. It looks like I am putting a really subtle amount of compression, probably mainly making it louder, which again will add some sort of grit to it a little bit. So altogether, that's this. We also get that with the original E vocal pad. So the one in red is the formats, or the sort of sibilance of it has changed, which to our ear sounds like the pitch of the original vocal has changed. This is that original thing. They're all doing the note E. There's just some tremolo happening on the bottom. Then finally, we have the big horns. The horns are also doing an E. This is really all about like the sound design of it, not so much like the music theory. That's what some people will tell you, which is really true about this music. Like, you don't need a ton of music theory, but that's really why I did the text sitting behind me, linked below, Music Theory for Electronic Producers, because I essentially, like, when I got into dance music production, you don't need to know a lot of music theory, but the little music theory that you do know and ear training can make all of this stuff exponentially easier. And ultimately, I think that just gets ourselves out of the way. It doesn't like, it makes it so our only issue is creativity. So I feel like once you understand all these tools, once you understand your computer and optimizing the computer for music production, and once you understand your gear in the studio and how to mix and what notes to put in and how to imagine or figure out what you're imagining and put it into the computer, the only limitation is really like what we imagine or the creativity. So again, that music theory stuff has helped a lot, but there's nothing that crazy happening. We all basically just have the one note happening here. Pretty wild, just the sound selection. So altogether, that is this. There's also an impact happening. That's a pretty huge and like a movie crash. That is a most likely cymatics effect that I'm using. Looks like I've reversed it. So that's a pretty cool technique. You can take like any hit that you get from sample pack or create on your own and just take that all, reverse it, and then you have this like trail before it. Sounds pretty gnarly. Cool. So moving along, let's go to our drop section. So I'll play a little bit of our build up into the drop, and then we're just going to run through that. All right. I probably will do like a breakout video for the actual like synth building, because I don't want to make this too crazy for some people. I want to make it really accessible. So essentially, let's look at the notes. So I have a growl happening. There's a lot of like call and response stuff. So the growl is also happening on the 1. It's kind of gnarly sounding. It sounds like this. And that is an instrument built in Serum. Let's show you that. So essentially, every other drop synth besides for my growl is going through a stack. It's going through a stack so that I can collapse it. Makes it easier to see. That's kind of like a theme of a lot of my mixes. Essentially, it just makes it easier to deal with. But then I'm also using that as a point to do side chaining. So I am side chaining against the kick. That helps to make this all like drive together and be like a bigger, I guess. So so we're going through Isotope Trash, and I'm doing basically a different custom sidechain on this growl. That's why it's not in the other stack of tracks. I wanted to have a different attack time for it. So this is a really, really simple one. It's called the D.R.U Huge Organ Wobble Satan 2. Not really that crazy. It's the default oscillator on oscillator A. It's down an octave. We're using some of that. And then I'm using Growl Table 12, maxed out. All together, the real craziness from this comes from the LFO. It's basically a decreasing ramp, and it's controlling the bend minus of oscillator A. It's controlling wavetable position of oscillator B. And then we have some simple effects chains happening. It's also controlling the mix of the distortion. That I made this track, like I said, came out a year ago, roughly, maybe a year and a half ago. I probably wrote it 2 years ago. And so I wrote this before I did the Noisia Tommy theme video, but essentially I'm doing the same thing that I show on that breakout video, where I'm using the LFO to modulate some sort of distortion parameter that goes a long way to get that grittiness out. All right, cool. The main thing gluing all of this together, like many drops, are the drums and the sub. So all together, all the drums and the sub lines sound like this. Oh, let's start it here. Awesome. So lots of cool stuff happening. Let's talk about the drums first. We basically have a standard backbeat happening where our snare is happening on beat 3. If we go to the cymbals, we're hearing some reverses. So basically kick on 1, snare on 3, kick on 1, snare on 3, kick on 1, snare on 3. Super simple for the kick and snare. Now the cymbals are also pretty simple. It's basically an 8th note. Now there's a subtle bit of swing in there. I'm using basic audio, so you can take those and drag them slightly behind the line like that. That's going to give you that swing feel. You can also do it over here by setting a delay, essentially, which is possible in a way. Some people do that. So the main thing that helps that track is the reversed sound. That reverse is just this on its own. It's this on its own. That helps a lot to lead into the snare. I've seen a bunch of different dance music producers do use this. Like the one that comes to mind is Feed Me. Feed Me did a video where he was kind of talking about this technique, and I saw that video and started to incorporate it into a lot of my tracks. So thank you, Feed Me. Shout out to every producer that does these kind of videos. I think it's all about showing the people the tricks of the trade so that they can make stuff that's awesome for the sake of music, not for the sake of like our own bank accounts necessarily, right? So let's see here. We got eighth notes on the cymbals. We've got the reverses happening. Cool. The standard sort of like halftime drums. The actual layers, you'll notice I have a trigger happening. I'm triggering the kick and the snare. So the main basses are all like cutting out on a halftime groove. So every half note. Then I'm layering up 2 different snares to get the sound of that. Both are going through reverb. So let's talk about that. Those buses. It looks like I'm using my standard reverb buses. You've probably seen these in other videos. I'm using the RC48 for like a big room sound. And then I'm using the Lexicon reverb, the UAD, for the Kevin Kline atmosphere. Or no, I'm not actually. This one I'm using a drum room sound. But most of the times I'm using that atmosphere UAD. Cool. So the last thing to talk about is like our talk back basses. So we basically have a growl, and then we have this stab happening. All right, so this is going to blow your mind how simple this is. It's literally just the one note. And it is this ARP Rilla sound, also a cymatics. It's basically Gorilla 2, a bunch of different parallel voices, and then using this step motion. If we go to the global matrix and look at LFO1, it's controlling the oscillator A semi. So essentially that's right here. What that does is that's what's creating the arpeggio sound. So these are all tuned. If I were to change those, it would change the note of it. Cool. And then we're hearing some delay, some reverb to it. Again, those are just like sort of talking back and forth. The final thing we have, so that stuff happens like the first 2 measures of the drop. Then we have the screech bass, and the screech bass is one that is really cool. It's basically like Elephant 2, Dolphin 1, all these animal oscillators. I'll go over a breakout video with all of these, but essentially hearing just those basses, it now sounds like this. Let's get our growl in there too, even though it's pretty gnarly sounding. Finally, we have 2 other layers. We've got a drop pad layer, which sounds like this, which essentially is a bounce of our vocal layer that I've affected a bunch and turned into audio using the little Ultra Boy to push the pitch again. That creates like a cool atmosphere for our drop. And then finally, we have this wobble, which is one that I built. It's super basic. It's actually exactly the same as our growl, but the difference is that I've changed the speed of the rate, and let's see here. That becomes this. So there's that bass. So it's basically the exact same thing that was happening before, only the rate of the LFO is faster. Now, music theory-wise, it's super, super simple. We're basically doing like the E here. We're doing the C, then the B here. That's the 1, and then 6, 5, minor 6 to the 5. The combination of all of these notes is giving us some harmonies. We don't actually have a single layer that's playing like a full-blown chord in this drop. or any of these other sections, but we get the sound of harmony from the combination of all the notes. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on one instrument. You can do it by separating it and having it on different instruments. In the beginning, the chord layer we get is this organ sound. So going back a little bit so that we can see this. So we get this chord layer in the very beginning, and then we get a similar one in our breakdown. So essentially, the bass line is walking down natural minor. It's going E, D, C, B. That's basically just going down the notes fully in natural minor. For those of you interested on a keyboard, that's basically going E, D, C, B. These 4 white keys. Pretty simple. Then on the top line, we're filling in some harmonies. So this becomes a 1 chord. That's an E minor. This is a D, F sharp, A. This is that major 7 chord. This is a C, G, E, C. So that's the major 6 chord. So 1, 7, 6, super basic. Then this is going to a 5. And this is where we don't actually get the dominant 7th yet. We get a, let's see here, we get an E, an A, an F sharp, and a B. So what's kind of interesting is that like this is like a B minor 7th, if you will, with an E. So like B minor 7th, B, D, F, A, with an E. Essentially like a diminished, you could call it like an we could call it a B minor 7 sus 4, which is kind of complicated and crazy. I essentially built that by ear. So again, it doesn't matter what we call this stuff. It just helps us to explain it afterwards. All together, it sounds like this. With the pad. Giant wall of the voicings. Really sounds huge. I am really happy with that section. All right, so to bring us home, let's look at our breakdown. It's kind of the last section that we haven't talked about. It's really similar to the intro. The difference is that instead of having the cello carrying the melodic section, which is happening in the introduction, we have this vocal doing the lead, which is basically going 1, 5, 6, 5, 6. All together, it sounds and looks like this. So that essentially happens again for our breakdown. So you could think of it as like this is the same 8 bar, like from here to here is the same like 8 bar buildup, similar, slightly bigger that we had in the beginning. But instead of a 4 measure breakdown, we still have the 4, but we basically inserted 8 measures in, which is that breakdown melody. Cool. The different thing that we're adding is that break lead on top. So everything else is the same on our buildup. We go into drop 2, and drop 2 is essentially really similar to drop 1 with some subtle variation. So by subtle variation, let's hear it. All right, so some of the stuff that's happening, you're hearing these drop bass stabs, which were in the second half of the drop the first time, are happening right from the beginning. Then when you hear that bass stab section, that is essentially a changed section. We'd have to investigate what I did here, but it looks like I added a second oscillator and I did some bending of the oscillator A to make the original bass stab thing sound like this. Now sounds like this. So it sounds obviously a lot brighter. It sounds like it has more of the detune, so I probably turned that up relative to the other one. Cool. So hopefully that helps you. Again, I know that some of you who watch this video are going to say, oh my gosh, this is like too much. But from my perspective, it's like I'm trying to do some videos that are really, really basic. I'm trying to do some others that give the people that want a little bit more, just like I said. So hopefully that helped. Again, I'll link to the track below. You'd help me out by going and just checking it out. I hope you enjoy it. Once again, my name is Andrew. And thank you for hanging out. If this video helped you out, you would help me out by subscribing to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications so you find out when I make a new video. I come out with these music theory breakdowns every Friday and try to come out with another piece of content each week. I will also link to my socials below, the music theory text. Thanks for tuning in. Have yourself a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.